The fourth glass of an obscenely expensive white wine had finally worked its way through my nerves, smoothing them like sandpaper dipped in honey. I sat on a balcony overlooking the hillside town of Vermont, a place that smelled like rosemary and the kind of wealth that paid people to alphabetize their spices. The late afternoon sunlight poured over everything with theatrical enthusiasm, turning the vineyards gold and the stone buildings peach. It was the first time in 12 years that my shoulders felt lighter than concrete. I watched my son Daniel laugh with his fiancée on the lawn below. The sound carried up toward me soft and clean, without even a hint of urgency. I scrunched my toes in the warm terrace tiles and let myself savor the moment. A fragile peace had settled over my mind, the rare kind that arrives only when the invisible weight of nonstop crises temporarily lifts from your spine. That was when my phone began to vibrate. Not a polite buzz, not a civilized alert. A jagged, frantic rattle as if the device were possessed by an accountant demon filing overdue tax forms. I looked down. My screen lit up with a name that made my eyelid twitch. Lance Farrow, Director of Operations, son of the Chief Executive. A man who believed Wi-Fi was controlled by atmospheric pressure and once bragged about repairing a laptop by shaking it very hard. I let the call ring. I took another slow sip of wine. It tasted like freedom in liquid form. The phone stopped. It started immediately again. Daniel looked up toward the balcony. "Mom, do you need to take that?" His brow pinched with concern. He knew my job title, Operations Continuity Manager, was simply a polite way of saying, person who prevents catastrophic collapse across 3 states. "No," I said, placing a slice of pear on a cracker. "I am on paid leave. That means I am temporarily unavailable to rescue overconfident executives from their own decisions." But the vibration continued. It rattled the antique iron table like a tiny earthquake that held a personal grudge. I inhaled slowly, the kind of inhale that precedes either enlightenment or crime, and answered. "Hello, Lance," I said flatly. "Get back here or you are terminated." His shrill voice burst from the speaker as if launched by cannon. Behind him, I heard the distinctive mechanical whine of cooling turbines spinning far too fast. It was a sound I knew more intimately than my own breathing. Something was overheating. "I am across the ocean," I said, "at a family celebration. My leave was approved months ago." "I do not care," he snapped. "The entire facility dashboard is red, all of it. You must log in and fix the coolant thresholds right now." I exhaled. "I cannot log in." "What do you mean you cannot?" "Because yesterday you removed my high-level credentials," I said calmly. "Your exact words were, and I quote, 'We need a modern hierarchy with agile thinking.' You gave my access to an apprentice who believes SQL is a sports league." A beat of silence. Then, "He is crying in the maintenance closet. Fix this anyway." "I cannot fix what I cannot touch," I said. "You ensured that." His breath hitched with rage. "If you do not return within 12 hours, you are terminated for cause, neglect, interference, sabotage." Sabotage. The word rested in the air like a spark waiting for dry brush. Something inside me clicked. A quiet, decisive click that sounded like the start of a very personal storm. "Understood," I said softly. And that was the moment the revenge began. To understand why Lance's accusation did not frighten me, you must know the kind of person he was. Lance did not walk into a room. He arrived, chin tilted up, as if oxygen itself owed him an apology. He carried the smug aura of someone who believed leadership came from owning a leather briefcase, not from actually understanding how anything functioned. He had shown up 4 months earlier in a suit so tight it cut off circulation to his better judgment. The chief executive, his father, introduced him as the future of operations. Future was a generous term. Catastrophe and loafers would have been more accurate. I remembered the first meeting distinctly. The glass conference room glowed with morning light as Lance stood at the front, clicking through slides that contained more buzzwords than actual content. I sat near the back with my notebook filled with hand-drawn cooling loop diagrams, the ones I had lovingly fine-tuned for years. Our facility was an old power conversion site, retrofitted into a high-density compute center. The system ran hot, dangerously hot. Everything in that building depended on the delicate choreography of coolant pumps, airflow regulators, and emergency pressure valves. I understood the system the way a conductor understands a symphony, every variable in tune with another. Lance did not. He pointed a laser at my chest as if marking a target. You are the principal operations strategist, correct? Senior systems operations engineer, I corrected. And yes. He nodded with the confidence of a man who did not realize he was standing on a trapdoor. Excellent. Based on your tenure and compensation level, it appears your role is part of an outdated structure. We are moving to an agile, distributed approach. Tribal knowledge will not be centralized in one individual. It is not tribal knowledge, I said evenly. It is specialized engineering. The thermal load in Sector 3 requires manual calibration every 48 hours, or the coolant distribution will stall. This is not something one automates with a generic plug-in. Lance laughed. A short, dismissive puff of air that smelled faintly of entitlement. Everything can be automated. That is the purpose of modernizing. You have emotional attachment to older systems. No. I had survival attachment to the laws of thermodynamics. But I stayed silent as he announced his great innovation. The hiring of a third-party vendor, a bright and suspiciously inexpensive firm named AeroCore Solutions. I knew of them. They were famous for sending undertrained technicians armed only with laminated checklists and the unfounded belief that machines always obeyed enthusiasm. I had warned him calmly, professionally, thoroughly, that if AeroCore altered the coolant logic without supervision, the facility would overheat. Not might, would. Lance waved off my warning the way one swats a fly, without concern for consequences. Then he stripped away my approval rights. Then he reassigned my engineers. Then he revoked my access to the override budgeting system. Then finally, the day before my planned vacation, he removed my administrative authentication entirely. But he made a single, exquisite mistake. He believed that removing my access meant he understood the system better than I did. He did not know that 5 years earlier I had embedded an emergency protocol beneath the main control layer. A discrete safety script. A quiet sentinel. It checked for my unique digital signature every 48 hours. If the signature appeared, normal operations continued. If not, the system assumed a hostile takeover and returned every coolant configuration to uninitialized state. Uninitialized, meaning off. I had even emailed him, politely titled Critical System Dependency. He skimmed it, then replied with one sentence that perfectly distilled his intellect. Too long. Will manage. Enjoy your holiday. Now the nanny protocol had activated, just as it was designed to do, and the foundation Lance stood on was about to crack straight through. While I enjoyed cool evening air brushing across the terraces of Vermont, the temperature inside the Ardencourt Compute Center was climbing like a rocket armed with poor intentions. I could imagine it perfectly because I had lived through controlled drills, but this was no drill. This was the real unraveling. The main operations hub, usually a calm, low hum of productivity, would now be a frenetic swarm. Warning panels blinking crimson, system graphs spiking into absurd angles, status readouts flaring with the sort of urgency normally reserved for imminent volcanic eruptions. AeroCore's technicians, 2 of them, neither old enough to remember dial-up internet, stared helplessly at the screens. They were hired for minimum wage, handed a set of instructions laminated in plastic, and told that they were innovators. I had once watched one of them confuse a cable coupler with a battery clip. These were not the cavalry. These were toddlers thrown a set of keys to a freight train. Meanwhile, Lance Farrow paced the glass-enclosed hub with the panicked swagger of a man trying to pretend he had control. His loafers slapped the tile in an irregular rhythm. He barked orders at anyone within range, none of them coherent. "Reboot the coolant host," he shouted. "We tried, sir. one technician stammered. "The host rejected the command. It says unauthorized." "That is impossible. You have the admin root password." "That password controls only the operating shell. It does not control the firmware." The technician wiped sweat from his brow. "Someone separated those systems." Yes, someone had. Me. I had done it after a malware ring attempted to hijack our cooling interface to mine cryptocurrency through temperature modulation. I had hardened the system to respond only to my encrypted credentials. But Lance did not know that, and he could not fix what he did not understand. The emergency tones shifted as the coolant pumps entered stasis. That meant the system had dropped into full protective mode. Without manual authorization, the machines did exactly what they were designed to do in a suspected breach. They shut everything down. Inside the server room, the heat would now be palpable. High-density compute racks behave like industrial ovens when airflow stops. Thousands of microfans spin at full throttle, creating a deafening, droning wall. The air thickens with hot dust and the acrid sting of overworked circuits. Then came the client alerts. A regional finance house experiencing severe transaction delays. A medical diagnostics firm losing access to imaging data. A global commerce chain reporting catastrophic request timeouts. Real people with real stakes were now part of the fallout. Lance's voice cracked as he yelled, "Find the documentation!" Marin must have left something. Ah, yes, the documentation. I had meticulously maintained a disaster recovery index with diagrams, steps, and override sequences. Lance had declared it clutter during his grand reorganization. He had archived everything older than 6 months into cold storage to save space. Cold storage located in a warehouse across the continent. The only file left in my old index folder was a collection titled Essential Builds, which contained, for reasons I do not regret, several hundred images of raccoons holding office supplies. A technician opened the folder. "Sir," he whispered, "it is only raccoons." "She has sabotaged us," Lance yelled. "It is not sabotage if you archive the real documents," another technician murmured. Even fear has limits, and that man had just reached his. I imagined the oppressive heat, the terrified interns, the useless fans wheeled in from break rooms, and I took another sip of my chilled wine. Physics was about to demonstrate consequences, and it would not negotiate. By the time I opened my personal laptop in Vermont, the sky above the vineyards had darkened into a muted lilac. The distant hum of cicadas floated upward in soft waves. My momentary peace returned, but only as a thin veil. I knew that somewhere thousands of kilometers away, panic had collected in thick, sweating bundles inside a building designed to run only when everything was executed with absolute precision. I refreshed the external sensor feed. Years earlier, I had quietly installed a parallel monitoring system, a set of tiny microcomputers hidden behind the power rails. They ran on a cellular network completely separate from the main infrastructure. I had nicknamed the system Canary because it warned me before anyone else smelled smoke. The terminal displayed the readouts in sharp green text. Sensor A, Sector 3 intake, 104.7 degrees Fahrenheit. Sensor B, Row 5. Fan exhaust, 109.2 degrees Fahrenheit. Sensor C, Central coolant loop, 113.0 degrees Fahrenheit. Status, critical escalation. It was a dangerous mathematical beauty. Nothing on Earth argues with thermodynamics. Heat moves, circuits melt, systems break. Ignorance pays its bill in physical consequences. Back at Ardencourt, total collapse hovered only minutes away. Lance had exhausted every desperate idea. He had pulled open floor tiles in search of mythical manual valves. He had demanded that interns wave box fans at the server racks. He had ordered AeroCore technicians to locate any USB drive in the building, convinced I had planted a magical override device somewhere in my desk like a treasure map. They found one, taped to the underside of a drawer. Lance seized it like a man discovering water in a desert. He slammed it into the nearest console. A denial message appeared at once. Biometric authentication required. Registered user, M. Lorne. It needs her fingerprint, a technician gasped. Lance stared at the screen with a blend of horror, confusion, and faint hope that perhaps he could simply shout the lock open. He could not. Behind him, a mist began to drift through the visible glass wall. Coolant vapor. The pressure valves in the secondary loop had surrendered. Micro droplets glimmered in the emergency lighting like pale ghosts rising from the machinery. "Is that smoke?" Lance whispered. "No, sir," said the intern, trembling. "It is vaporized coolant. If it hits anything electrical, the fire suppression protocol will trigger. The halon system will drop." Halon does not extinguish fire in a friendly manner. It removes oxygen. Entirely. No oxygen means no combustion. It also means no breathing for anyone inside. A klaxon remained silent, but the strobes activated. White flashes pulsed against the glass, stark and rhythmic, like the heartbeat of an indifferent god. 7 minutes, the intern said. "Sir, we must evacuate." Lance collapsed against the console, sliding downward until he sat on the floor. The room shimmered with heat. He looked very small, as if the weight of his title had finally evaporated, replaced with the unremarkable truth beneath. His phone vibrated. His father, Chief Executive Orion Farrow, was calling. Lance did not answer. He could not find the courage. But Orion found me. My phone buzzed on the balcony. Orion Farrow. The man who negotiated mergers like a sword fighter, and who wrote 6-page emails about leadership philosophies he did not understand. I let it ring. 2 minutes passed. I received a text. "Call me immediately. Name your terms." Negotiation through fire has a certain elegance, but the true art lives in silence. And I was in no hurry. I waited exactly 2 minutes before dialing Orion Farrow. In negotiation, time is leverage, and I intended to apply it with precision. When he answered, his voice carried the edge of a man accustomed to commanding entire rooms through sheer force of personality, now meeting a situation immune to intimidation. "Fix the system," he said without greeting. "Now." "I cannot," I replied calmly. "I am no longer an employee. If I access any part of your infrastructure, I risk criminal liability." Lance made that exceedingly clear. "You are rehired immediately," he barked. "Your previous role is reinstated." "I do not want my old role," I said. "Your organization does not value its engineers. It treats us as replaceable until we are not." A muffled explosion of shouting echoed faintly through Orion's phone. He must have routed himself into the operations hub. Through the noise, I heard brittle panic as technicians yelled updated temps. The coolant vapor had thickened into a cloudy shimmer. The halon countdown had begun. Orion lowered his voice. "What do you want?" At last, a reasonable question. "A consulting position," I said. "Independent. An annual retainer paid in advance. My rate is $500 an hour, guaranteed for 1 year. I want the title of Interim Chief Technical Officer until a suitable candidate is found. All strategic authority for infrastructure resides with me. No exceptions." "That is outrageous," he snapped. "What is the projected loss if the halon system deploys?" I asked gently. "Facility damage, client liabilities, contract violations, regulatory penalties, brand collapse. Estimate the sum, then compare it to 1 year of my rate." He did the math. He did not say it, but I heard the number in the silence that followed. It was large enough to buy a small nation. "What else?" he asked stiffly. "A written apology from Lance," I said. "Notarized. A formal admission of mismanagement, negligence, and interference with critical engineering processes. It will remain in my personal file." Across the line, I heard Orion exhale. Slow. I imagined him staring at the blinking alarm lights. His empire was about to collapse because his son believed arrogance could substitute for understanding. "Done," Orion said at last. "The retainer transfer will be authorized immediately. Fix it." "Send me the confirmation first," I said. "You are extorting me." "No," I replied. "I am demonstrating supply and demand." There was a flurry of chaos as he shouted orders to his finance officers. A minute later, my phone buzzed with a banking alert. 6 digits appeared. Very green. Very pleasant. Pleasure to do business, I said, opening my laptop. The real master key was stored on a physical authentication device attached to my machine. The USB stick Lance had found under my desk had been nothing more than a decoy, meant to distract the inexperienced, and it had succeeded flawlessly. I connected to the secure back channel that I had engineered long ago for emergencies. The command line opened like a familiar door. Sudo user local havac override reset force, return. The signal crossed continents. Deep within the Ardencore Compute Center, the master coolant controller roared back to life. A deep metallic thrum shook the floor as the compressors engaged. Cold air blasted through the vents, slicing through the oppressive heat like a blade of winter. On the wall displays, temperatures plummeted. 113 degrees, 108 degrees, 101 degrees, 92 degrees, stabilizing. The halon timer canceled itself. The fog dissipated. Technicians collapsed in relieved, overheated heaps. A final message appeared on the central console. System restored. Current administrator, M. Lorne, interim CTO. Lance Farrow is to collect personal items and exit the premises. I closed my laptop. The cicadas continued their soft chorus. Down on the lawn, Daniel waved up at me as if nothing momentous had occurred on the other side of the world. "It is done," I said aloud. 2 weeks later, when I returned, my corner office waited with wide windows and a quiet hum. Someone had placed a small shrine on my new desk. A framed print of a raccoon holding a wrench and a handwritten note that read simply, "Thank you for saving everything. Signed, the staff you actually valued." I sat back in my chair, sipped my coffee, and looked over the now stable status dashboard, glowing in calm, steady green. I was no longer the unseen custodian of a fragile empire. Now I was its architect. And the cost of underestimating me had been paid in full.